My name is Vincent Kowalski. I am 33 years old, and I work as an avalanche search and rescue specialist with a certified avalanche dog in Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, please. I've been doing avalanche rescue work for 11 years. The last 6 with my German Shepherd rescue dog named Atlas. We're trained to locate people buried under avalanche debris, and we work in some of the most dangerous terrain in Colorado at elevations above 12,000 feet, where avalanches are common during winter and spring. Atlas has found 7 people buried in avalanches during our partnership, 5 of them alive. He is one of the best avalanche dogs in the state. This happened last February during a heavy snow year when avalanche danger was extreme across the Colorado Rockies. We got called out on a rescue mission around 3 p.m. 2 backcountry skiers had triggered a large avalanche on the northeast face of Ypsilon Mountain and were reported missing by their third partner, who'd watched from a safe location. The debris field was massive, covering maybe 2 acres, with snow depths of 10 to 15 feet. We arrived at the site by helicopter, me and Atlas, along with 3 other rescue teams. The third skier showed us approximately where his partners had been when the avalanche hit. We deployed immediately, Atlas working the debris field while I followed, watching his behavior for any indication he'd caught scent. The other team spread out with probes and transceivers. Following standard search protocol, Atlas worked for about 20 minutes with no alerts. Then suddenly, he stopped, hackles raised, staring upslope toward the rocky cliffs above the debris field. His behavior changed completely from focused searching to what I recognized as fear or extreme agitation. He started backing away from the debris field, whining, refusing to continue working despite my commands. This was completely unlike him. Atlas has never refused to work, never shown fear in dangerous conditions. I tried to redirect him back to the search, but he kept backing away, staring at those cliffs above us. Then I heard it, a deep, resonant sound like rock grinding against rock coming from the cliff area. The other rescuers heard it too and stopped working. We all looked up at the cliffs in the fading afternoon light. I saw movement, something large shifting position among the rocks, maybe 200 feet above us. At first I thought it was a bear. We occasionally see bears, even in winter, but the movement was wrong, too deliberate, too coordinated. Then it stood up, upright on 2 legs, massive, at least 8 feet tall, even at that distance. Dark brown or black coloration, standing on a rocky outcrop looking down at us. It was too far for details, but the posture was unmistakably bipedal, and the size was far beyond any bear. Atlas went into full panic mode, something I'd never seen from him. He bolted, running back toward where the helicopter had dropped us off. I called after him, but he kept running. The other rescuers were staring up at this figure, nobody speaking, all of us processing what we were seeing. The team leader made a call. He said we were aborting the search due to dangerous conditions. We'd come back with a larger team and better equipment. It was clearly a cover explanation, but nobody argued. We all wanted off that mountain immediately. We hiked back to the landing zone, found Atlas there waiting, still agitated. The helicopter extracted us, and we returned to base. The official report stated that deteriorating weather and continued avalanche danger forced us to suspend the search until conditions improved. But that night, the team leader called me privately. He said that in 23 years of mountain rescue work in Colorado, he'd had 3 other experiences where rescue dogs refused to work and showed extreme fear for no apparent reason. All 3 times were in remote high elevation areas. All 3 times dogs had stared at something above them that the handlers couldn't see clearly, and all 3 times the searches had been aborted. He told me something else. The 2 skiers we'd been searching for were never found, despite multiple additional search operations over the following weeks, involving dozens of rescuers, helicopters, and extensive probing of the entire debris field. The avalanche that buried them wasn't actually that large by our standards, and in a debris field of that size, we should have found bodies eventually, even if they didn't survive. But we found nothing. No gear, no clothing, No trace of two people who'd been witnessed being caught in that avalanche. I did research after that incident and found disturbing information. Rocky Mountain National Park has an unusually high number of people who've gone missing and never been found. Over 60 unsolved disappearances since the park was established in 1915. Many are attributed to falls, exposure, or getting lost, but some have elements that don't fit normal explanations, including people disappearing in areas that were thoroughly searched. The Arapaho and Ute peoples, whose ancestral territory includes the area now within Rocky Mountain National Park, have traditional knowledge about beings they describe as mountain guardians or high country giants. According to their teachings, these beings inhabit the most remote and highest elevations, above 12,000 feet, where few people venture, and they're territorial about humans entering their areas. They're described as extremely large, bipedal, and intelligent. Atlas never fully recovered from whatever happened that day. He continued working as an avalanche dog for another year, but he was never the same. He'd become nervous at high elevations, would refuse to work in certain areas without apparent reason. And eventually, I had to retire him early. He is living with me now as a pet, but he still has reactions sometimes. Staring at nothing, backing away from things I can't see. I still work in avalanche rescue, but with a new dog now. And I am more careful about where I take rescue operations. When a dog shows extreme fear and refuses to work, I don't push it anymore, because I learned that day that our working dogs can sense things we can't. And sometimes their fear is warning us about something our human senses aren't picking up. The Colorado Rockies contain vast areas above treeline where humans rarely go, especially in winter. The high country above 12,000 feet is brutal, temperatures dropping to -30, winds exceeding 100 miles per hour, avalanche danger constant. Perfect habitat for something that wants to remain unknown. And based on what I saw that day on Ypsilon Mountain and conversations with other longtime rescue workers who've had similar experiences they don't talk about publicly, something does live in those high elevation areas, something large enough to be visible at 200 feet, even in fading light, something that stands upright, like a human, but bigger than any person, and something that our highly trained rescue dogs recognize as a threat, serious enough to overcome all their training and flee in terror. My name is Gregory Hayes. I am 48 years old, and I am an urban explorer and photographer who specializes in documenting abandoned places, particularly old mining towns in the Colorado Rockies. I've been doing this for 16 years, visiting and photographing hundreds of ghost towns across Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming. This happened last September in an abandoned mining town I'll call Ashton, though that is not its real name, located at about 11,000 feet elevation in a remote valley accessible only by a rough four-wheel drive road. The town was established in the 1880s during Colorado's silver boom, had a peak population of maybe 800 people, and was completely abandoned by 1920 when the mines played out. Now it is just ruins, maybe 20 collapsed structures, and several old mine entrances. I'd researched Ashton thoroughly before visiting. It is not well known, even among ghost town enthusiasts, because it is so difficult to reach, and there is not much left standing. I drove in alone on a Thursday, planning to spend the day photographing and exploring, then drive out before dark. The road took 3 hours from the nearest paved highway. I arrived around 10 a.m. and started photographing immediately. The site was incredible from a historical perspective. Lots of artifacts still scattered around, despite a century of abandonment. I was working through the ruins methodically, taking photos and making notes, completely absorbed in my work. Around 1 p.m., I entered one of the larger structures, what appeared to have been a boarding house or hotel. The roof was partially collapsed, but several rooms were still accessible. I was photographing the interior when I found something that didn't fit. In one room, in the corner, there was a pile of fresh pine boughs arranged like bedding, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Fresh, meaning cut within the last few weeks based on how green the needles still were. That made no sense. Ashton is miles from anywhere. The road is barely passable, and I'd seen no evidence of recent human activity. No tire tracks except my own, no trash, no campfire remains. Who would cut fresh pine boughs and arrange them in an abandoned building in a ghost town nobody visits? I photographed it and continued exploring. In the next building I found more pine boughs, another bed-like arrangement. Then in a third building, the same thing. Someone or something was using these abandoned structures, creating bedding in multiple locations. I started to feel uneasy. Then I found the bones. In what had been a general store, scattered across the floor, I found animal bones. Fresh bones, with tissue still attached to some of them, from deer or elk, based on the size. The bones had been cracked open, the marrow extracted, and there were dozens of them, piled in a corner like someone had been processing animals and discarding the bones there. At this point, I decided I was leaving. This was clearly someone's camp or living area, and I didn't want to be there when whoever it was came back. I walked quickly back toward my truck, which I'd parked at the edge of town. As I approached my truck, I saw it. Standing maybe 50 yards away between me and my vehicle was the largest humanoid figure I've ever seen. At least 8 feet tall, massively built, covered in dark brown hair, standing upright on 2 legs. It was just standing there, motionless, positioned directly in my path to the truck. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing and what to do. Running seemed pointless. This thing could clearly outrun me. Approaching my truck meant walking directly toward it. I stood frozen, not knowing what to do. Then it moved, not toward me, but to the side, stepping off the path between me and my truck. It walked maybe 20 feet to the side, then stopped and turned to face me again. It had moved out of my direct path, creating a clear route to my truck. I didn't hesitate. I walked quickly to my truck, got in, started it, and backed out of there as fast as I could safely manage on that rough road. In my rearview mirror, I could see it still standing there, watching me leave, motionless. I drove the 3 hours back to the highway without stopping, shaking the entire time. When I got cell service again, I called a friend who was also an urban explorer and told him what happened. He said I'd just described a classic encounter with what researchers call a Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, and that abandoned mining camps in the Colorado high country are known hotspots for these encounters among people who investigate this phenomenon. I did extensive research after that experience. There are hundreds of reports from Colorado's high country of people encountering large bipedal figures, particularly around abandoned mining camps and in remote valleys above 10,000 feet. Many reports describe the same details I'd witnessed: extremely tall, heavily built, covered in hair, bipedal locomotion. The Ute people have traditional knowledge about beings they call by various names that translate roughly to the stick people or the giants. According to their teachings, these beings live in the highest and most remote mountain areas. They're intelligent and peaceful generally, but very territorial, and they'll use abandoned human structures for shelter, particularly in winter. What is most significant to me was the creature's behavior. It didn't act aggressive. It positioned itself between me and my truck, perhaps as a warning or demonstration that it was aware of me. But then it moved aside, allowing me to leave. That suggests intelligence and decision, making, not instinctive animal behavior. I still explore abandoned places and photograph ghost towns. It is my passion and my work. But I am much more cautious now about remote sites that show signs of recent activity. Pine bough bedding, fresh animal bones, unusual arrangements of objects. These are signs I now recognize as warnings that a location is currently occupied by something that was there long before it was abandoned by humans, and that has reclaimed it. Colorado has hundreds of ghost towns and thousands of abandoned mines, most in extremely remote locations at high elevations. Perfect habitat for large mammals that want to avoid human contact, but that can utilize structures humans left behind. And based on what I experienced at Ashton and research I've done since, something does live in those high mountain valleys. Something that uses abandoned buildings for shelter, processes animals for food, and occasionally has to make clear to human visitors that these sites aren't actually abandoned at all. My name is Nathan Cross. I am 29 years old, and I am an experienced long-distance hiker who has completed the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, and Continental Divide Trail. Last summer I was hiking the Colorado Trail, which runs 486 miles from Denver to Durango through the heart of the Colorado Rockies. The Colorado Trail is spectacular but challenging, crossing multiple mountain ranges with significant elevation changes, reaching above 13,000 feet in several locations. Most people take about a month to complete it. I was doing it in sections over multiple trips, tackling the most remote central sections last July. I was on day 4 of a 7-day section from Monarch Pass to San Luis Pass, hiking alone through the Castopa Hills, one of the most isolated sections of the entire trail. This area is high, elevation open terrain, mostly above tree line, with incredible views, but also complete exposure and virtually no other hikers. I hadn't seen another person in 3 days. I was hiking through the afternoon, making good time, when I crested a ridge and saw something that stopped me immediately. Maybe 300 yards ahead on the trail, there was a figure. At that distance, and in the bright high-altitude sunlight, I initially thought it was another hiker, but something seemed off about the proportions and the gait. I continued hiking, watching this figure. It was walking the same direction I was, moving slowly. As I got closer, maybe 200 yards, I realized this wasn't a person. It was huge, far too tall and broad to be human, walking upright, but with a stride that was too long, covering ground too quickly for the apparent effort. I stopped and pulled out my binoculars. Through the magnification, I could see clearly. It was at least 7.5 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair, massively built through the shoulders and chest, walking on 2 legs with a smooth, efficient gait. Not a bear. Bears don't walk like that. This was bipedal, naturally upright, moving with purpose. I stood frozen, watching through my binoculars. It walked maybe another 100 yards down the trail, then stopped, and turned around to look directly back at me. Even at that distance, I could tell it was looking at me. Could see the head turn, the body orient in my direction. We stayed like that for maybe a minute, me watching through binoculars, it watching back. Then it stepped off the trail and walked down the slope to the right, moving through the tundra with remarkable speed. Within maybe 30 seconds, it had covered several hundred yards and disappeared into a valley below the ridge. I continued hiking, reaching the point where it had left the trail. I examined the ground carefully. The trail surface was mostly rock and hard-packed dirt, but in one soft spot, I found a clear print. Massive, roughly humanoid, maybe 17 inches long with 5 distinct toe impressions. I photographed it extensively with my phone and a water bottle for scale. I hiked maybe another mile, processing what I'd seen, then made camp early even though it was only 4 p.m. I wasn't comfortable continuing after that encounter. I set up my tent on an exposed ridge where I had visibility in all directions, not wanting to be surprised by anything approaching. That night around 10 p.m., I heard something I'll never forget. A vocalization from somewhere in the valley below my ridge, maybe half a mile away. It started as a low howl, rose to a high-pitched scream, then descended again. It lasted maybe 8 seconds. Not a coyote, not an elk, not anything I'd heard in all my time hiking wilderness areas. It was loud enough to hear clearly despite the distance and the wind. I heard it 3 more times over the next 2 hours, always from different locations, like whatever was making the sound was moving around the valley. I didn't sleep much that night, sitting in my tent with my headlamp off, listening. The next morning I continued hiking, covering maybe 15 miles that day, pushing hard to get through that section. I saw no other signs, but felt watched the entire time, that prickling awareness that you are being observed. I completed that section in 6 days instead of 7, cutting it short and hiking out a day early. Back home, I posted about my experience on a long-distance hiking forum, being vague about the specific location. I got 24 responses from other Colorado trail hikers who'd had similar experiences in remote sections, seeing large bipedal figures, hearing vocalizations that don't match known animals, finding tracks that are too large for human. Most hadn't reported their experiences publicly because they didn't want to sound crazy or get mocked. The Ute people, whose ancestral territory includes the central Colorado Rockies where this happened, describe mountain beings they say have always lived in the highest elevations. They're described as extremely tall, powerfully built, covered in hair ranging from brown to reddish, and generally avoiding humans, but occasionally being seen in remote areas far from settlements. What convinced me this was real and not misidentification was the combination of evidence. The visual sighting at relatively close range in good daylight conditions, the physical track with clear toe impressions, and the vocalizations that night that multiple other hikers in different years have reported hearing in the same general area. I continue long-distance hiking because it is what I love. But I am more aware now that in the most remote sections of these trails, especially in Colorado's high country above treeline, I might not be alone even when I haven't seen another human in days. Something else lives in those mountains, something that uses the same trails occasionally, something that has been there far longer than the trails have existed, and something that apparently doesn't want contact, but will make its presence known when hikers get too close to areas it considers its territory. The Colorado Trail passes through some of the most remote terrain in the state, hundreds of miles through mountains that see very few humans even during peak hiking season. Perfect habitat for large mammals that avoid human contact. And based on what I saw that day on the trail, and conversations with other long-distance hikers who've had similar encounters they rarely talk about, something does live in that high country. Something that walks upright, leaves tracks too big for human, and vocalizes in ways that don't match any animal science has documented in Colorado.